Hey, Scott from MyGrowthRings.com here once again is in my garage shop where, despite the rest of the house having been moved out, I'm still hoarding this little corner of the garage just for me and you to have these conversations. We'll see how long that lasts. So in this video, a much requested topic, which is the scroll saw. Now, I've had probably just as many requests that I go over the old Jigsaw. And in fact, when you say the old Jigsaw, there's actually been a number of Jigsaws and a number of scroll saws even. And I figured let's just go ahead and start here. In the evolution of the Shopsmith Jigsaw to scroll saw, it began back in the 1940s with a jigsaw that mounted on top of the 10ER. Now that throws a lot of people off when they go to look at an old Shopsmith machine and they see that jigsaw. It always looks like it's missing a bunch of parts because it doesn't have tubes to attach it to the machine. It doesn't even have a table. And that's because you use the table of the 10ER. From there, in the 1950s, Magna came out with a jigsaw that mounted just like the scroll saw, the bandsaw, the jointer. It was designed to be on the Mark V. And in fact, I believe in one of the pictures I showed you, the patent of the Mark V, it actually showed the jigsaw on the end of the machine. Now how a jigsaw differs from a scroll saw, jigsaws are only being powered on their downstroke. So as the spindle's turning on your motor or your headstock, it's turning, let's just call it a cam, that pulls on the bottom of the blade. Now on the top of the blade, above the wood, you have to have a strong spring to pull it back up. As a result of that, it's difficult to make a very sharp turn because you might pinch the blade. And if you pinch the blade enough that the spring can't pull it, at the same time, the shaft is shoving the bottom half of the blade up, you end up bending, fatiguing, and eventually breaking the blade on a jigsaw. So jigsaws are designed for making jigsaw puzzles, slow, lazy curves. And of course, you can make straight cuts as well. Now, the scroll saw is a completely different animal. This machine is powering the blade on both the downstroke and the upstroke. You can even put spiral blades or blades that have teeth facing both up and down, and you can take advantage of a little bit of that power on the upstroke. But I'll show you why it's not a great idea. It's just an idea. It's something you can do. But as I mentioned, the Shopsmith Scroll Saw went through quite an evolution. This was, I believe, the last iteration, and this is a Mark V mounted scroll saw. This same machine was designed to mount on its own stand or have legs integrated into it. You can see here on the castings, there are holes drilled to accept legs for this. But this one wouldn't be able to be powered on those legs because on the freestanding version, the motor is built up inside of this base. How do you tell the difference between these, and does it even matter? Yeah, it matters. The machine the scroll saw was introduced in the late 1980s, and it was made of aluminum and really overbuilt. The guys that designed this thing wanted to make something that was different than anything on the market. Back in those days, the big player was RB Industries and the Hawk scroll saw. And of course, Hegner coming out of Germany. That was an amazing but small scroll saw. Well, RBI came out with the Hawk, and then eventually they came out with one that mounted on a Mark V, and that was the final straw for Shopsmith. They just had to push forward with their design. And their design was, there's really nothing like it. The fact that they had this solid ectoskeleton on the outside of this, covering up the upper arm that is stroking up and down, was just never seen before. It used to be, the original version, by the way, I'm not wearing my earbuds today, so the mic is only on my device here, so if I turn away, you can't hear me. It just wasn't pairing very well today. Anyway, you had a cover here, a metal cover. It was eventually replaced by a clear plastic cover. But when you put that down, you couldn't see much of what you were doing. It cast a shadow, if nothing else. Shopsmith also had a hold down, kind of a spring hold down. Because when you use a scroll saw, you got to hold the stock down. Because there's so much force coming up, you got to hold the stock down. And everybody knew that. But our designers thought, you know what? No one else has this. We're going to have something better. Let's have a hold down on it. Well, the hold down was a little wonky. It sometimes would dig into the wood as you turned around and such. And once you use the machine, you get used to needing to hold it down, and everything works just fine. Another thing that they had that was kind of silly was built into that hold down, there was about a 1/4-inch steel shaft that had a little V cut into it that would rub against the back of the blade. Now, the idea was it kept the blade from bowing. But the thing about a scroll saw and what makes it work so well is the blade bows a little bit. But the blade gives you a straight cut. It's kind of amazing how it works. Additionally, they made it kind of complicated in how you set the thing up. Now, I don't have these old blocks here at the top of the blade, the top arm and on the bottom arm. You had these metal blocks that you would clamp the blade into. I do happen to have one of the old jigs. So when you bought the original Shopsmith Scroll Saw back in the 80s, you got one of these jigs with it, and you would mount the little blocks into this jig, and then that would allow you to position the blade at the proper distance. You would then snap that in place with a couple little spring pins above and below the table. In fact, I can on this one. I can pull that pin. It's still there. Oh, I can't get it out. Oh, well, can't get it out. You could pull those blocks out, and then that would position the blade the proper length. Then on the back of the saw, you had this special knob that would click, and you would count the number of clicks, and that would get you to the proper tension, as long as you use the jig to get your blade to the right length. Nobody else had anything like it. No one else asked for it. It was just complicated. Everyone else, like animals, would just pluck the blade, and when it sounded like it was tuned high enough, they were good to go. That's the way I do it now. Anyway, not a terrible idea. It's just, it wasn't necessary. So the next thing that they came out with was they had this cast little block that you could put the end of the blade holder into it, and that allowed you to hold it in place while you tightened it on. And no, that isn't what came. Okay, yeah, no. I'm forgetting the order of this. I think that that's what came next, and it was sort of a proof of concept. Then they changed the table, and they mounted or cast into the table on both sides a little blade holder that you could use that to set your blocks up. And again, that would get you to the proper length. I want to say then that the little block came next because they realized you didn't need to position those at a particular length. And you certainly, while you were sitting doing pierce work, you didn't want to be jumping up off of your stool and coming back here and setting it up. So I think the little block came next. And then Shopsmith realized that they could hold on a second. Come over here with me. Then they realized that they could just make a little square hole in the table, and that would basically act like a wrench to hold the block while you were getting the blade tightened in place. And then they came up with what I have here, which this upper block is pre-installed. It's held in place with a roll pin, and they introduced this little cam. So once you tension your blade using the knob in the back, you could just flip this forward and that would release the tension. Let's just go ahead and put a blade on here to give you the idea. So I'll start with this loose. And let's pick a blade. You can see I've got all kinds of old Shopsmith blades in here. There's Olson made Shopsmith blades, in case you're wondering. More Olson blades. Let's just put a really thin blade on here. This says medium fine. A little bit rusty. These are held with a very thin wire holding them together. There you go. And I need to take a good look at this to determine which way the teeth are facing. I can run my finger up and down and determine which way it feels like it's dragging on my finger. I believe that this is one of those blades that does not have reverse teeth on it. Okay, I can see it now. There we go. So this is going to go down through the slot. Well, actually, let's see if we can get this block out, because I think that might be helpful. I don't know why this doesn't want to release very well, but there you can see the block as it is now. It tightens and loosens with this little thumb screw. It used to be we had a cap screw that you would tighten with a hex wrench. And we can set this block right down here if we want, slide the blade into that. We basically put the blade underneath the head of the tip of that screw. And then we just use that as a wrench to hold it while we tighten it down. Now we can center the blade in that block by running the set screw from the back side forward. Right now, that is not exactly centered. I would want to move that set screw in, but hey, we're just going to go with it and see what happens. So I'm going to come up through the table, under the table. I'm going to pass that through the opening. I'm pulling the pin below and just need for that to go through the hole in the blade block. Come on. There we go. All right, now we're going to come down here and we're going to do the same from above. It looks like I need to loosen my tension at the back. And we'll tighten that up. And we'll flip that over. Sounds nice and tight. I can adjust it at the back, change the pitch if I like. But first, a little Foggy Mountain breakdown. So when I'm making a cut, if I'm making a pierce cut where I've passed through a hole in my wood, I can flip that lever, loosen that thumb screw, and fold this forward and pass my stock over a fresh hole, tighten that down, flip that, and it should tighten roughly at the same tension. Let's go ahead and get this coupled up to the Mark V and see what happens. Now I'm going to show you how tight I can make a turn. And you can see we can make an incredibly tight turn. Now the trick to this is the blade, in this case, I'm not using a spiral blade. It's only cutting here on the front. It can't cut me from the back or the side, so very safe. So the trick is when you get to the point where you want to make a cut or make a turn, stop advancing, stop pushing forward, and the blade will just kind of stay as if it was a needle on a sewing machine. And then as I go to spin the board, I'm going to put a little bit of pressure against the side of that blade so that I can pivot. Now I'm pulling against the back of the blade, and then I continue forward. When I get to that point, I stop. I put a little bit of pressure against the side of the blade. Okay, imagine I'm pulling against the side of the blade here, and that keeps me tight in the corner, and then continue on. All the while we're holding it down firmly, otherwise this will happen. So not a whole lot's going to happen with a thin piece of stock with a very fine blade. Using a more aggressive blade or a thicker piece of stock, we certainly could have had a lot of chattering going on here. But just with some two-sided tape, we could pad saw this, and it works really well. So let's drill a hole through this. I need to drill a hole. How do I drill a hole in this place now? I've packed up my drill bits. I've packed up my drill. We're not going to drill a hole. We'll drill a hole in the midweek episode. How about that? Okay, a couple other tricks we can do here. We do have the ability to tilt the table on this machine. And you can see here, I can go all the way to 45, but that certainly limits my capacity of cut. And I can go 45 either direction, but now I'm running into this, this knob that's on the side here. So really where you might run into, or may want to be doing a cut that's an angle, is like a dovetail. Now you're talking maybe a 7-degree cut either direction. So it's not really a problem or a limitation. Let's get a couple close-up shots. Here you can see the upper guide block and the tension release. You can see it has a blower. That hose leads all the way around the back of the arm and down to the base where it's powered by the stroking of the lower arm. The lower arm, you can see, has its own set of blocks to hold the blade. This is the linkage that is connecting it to actually a dual set of gears and counterbalances that help this machine run smoother. Additionally, when they changed the casting, they went ahead and made a couple little pockets that you can store your wrenches and your blades in as well. And then there you can see how it's pivoting on just a single pin as opposed to a trunnion as we have here on the front. Very similar trunnion to your Mark V. Now the biggest thing that Shopsmith changed on this machine was they changed what they made the table and the base casting from. Originally they were made from aluminum. They eventually switched to zinc. That allowed them to make a much heavier saw, which in turn would dampen vibration. Now, how much heavier? The original one was about 35 pounds. This one weighs about 65 pounds. So crazy heavy. Now, just a personal preference. I prefer the freestanding model. I like this machine having support on the 4 extreme corners as opposed to on 2 posts 7 inches apart. It's much smoother on its own stand. If you happen to have a stand model version of the saw, my recommendation is to mount it on an anti-fatigue mat. Get yourself about a 5-foot long anti-fatigue mat and put the saw on the back part of it and put yourself on the front part of it, and that'll really dampen vibration, plus it'll be more comfortable for you. Okay, what else can we say about this? You know, I guess I need your questions, comments, and cheap shots, and we'll talk about what you're interested in our midweek follow-up. So that's it for now. Make it a great week, and I'll see you then.